Hello everybody and welcome to a brief guide on all the laws in Victoria 3. I'll try to make this as quick as possible and I'll just be going over every law briefly, so if you want to learn more then I would recommend looking at the wikis. First of all, you have three sections: power structure, economy, and human rights. These are basically your government principles, so what your government actually is, whether a monarchy or a republic, and what kind of voting you may have. I'll work from left to right. Anyways, the first one is government principles. Just one other thing, I am sick right now, I have a very sore throat, so if my voice is a little bit not right, that's why. We have 5 options here. The first one in the government principles list is the monarchy. I can assume that most people out there know what a monarchy is. What this does is it just makes your leader one person. It could be a woman, it's usually a guy, and it'll be passed down to their heir when they die instead of an election. You can still have elections as a monarchy though if you go to distributions of power and you have voting. That's how you have a constitutional monarchy. If you have an oligarchy or an autocracy though, then the laws you pass will have to be in accordance with the monarchy. So for instance, William of Hanover here is the starting king of Great Britain, and he's part of the petite bourgeoisie, and he is a royalist. If the UK was an autocracy, then I'd only be able to pass laws that this bloke here supports. You can fiddle with it a little bit more than that, but that's basic gist. Next is the presidential republic. It's a republic. You can still have an autocracy or an oligarchy as a republic. That's how you get a junta. An example at the start of the game is Venezuela, which has both presidential republic and oligarchy, and are even listed as a junta. Next, we have the parliamentary republic, which is a lot like the presidential republic. The main difference is that a parliamentary republic cannot also be a dictatorial authority. So if you have parliamentary republic, then you cannot also have autocracy or oligarchy. Your political parties also get more legitimacy from votes, and you can have more political parties in your government without suffering a penalty. Next is a theocracy. It is very similar to the monarchy in how it functions. The main difference is that the theocracy increases the political strength of the devout, while the monarchy increases the political strength of the landowners. The Council Republic is the last one in this list, and it can only be unlocked after you research socialism, which is here, by the way, in the society tree. The Council Republic functions pretty similarly to the Parliamentary Republic, except you get half of the legitimacy from votes that you do with the Parliamentary Republic, and you get minus 10% government ideology penalty. Having less government ideology penalty means that you will suffer less legitimacy loss when you have people in your government that disagree with your current laws. The Council Republic also unlocks being able to do the cooperative ownership law in the economic systems, but I'll be going over that later. It also says in the tooltip, enacting this law may cause countries without a similar form of government principles to become aggressive against us. I haven't experimented with this law enough to really know if that's true or false, so I'll just leave you with that. Next, we have the distributions of power, or the voting systems. I'm going to divide these into 2 categories, those with voting and those without voting. I'll start with the ones without voting because they are at the top. The first one is autocracy. Like I said earlier, this gives you a lot more authority, but it also makes it so that you can only pass laws based on the leader of your government's personal agenda. Next is the technocracy and the oligarchy, which are both basically exactly the same. It's very similar to the autocracy. There's still no political parties or voting, but you can shuffle around your interest groups a little bit easier. And you don't just have to pass laws that the head of your government wants. You can pass laws that anyone you put in the government wants. Those are all the ones that don't involve voting, and I should mention that all of them unlock the command economy law, which I'll be going over later. Next is the laws which enable voting. These are landed voting, wealth voting, census suffrage, and universal suffrage, and they are all very similar. In as short as possible, landed voting means that mainly the aristocrats and the rich people can vote. Wealth voting means mainly the rich people can vote. Census suffrage is all literate males can vote for the most part. And universal suffrage is anyone can vote, and that includes women if you have women's suffrage, which is another law over here, and I'll go over that later. Almost all these have some type of government ideology penalty, whether 20 or 10%, except for universal suffrage. Also, you can pass women's suffrage if you have census suffrage, although it doesn't make much sense to me. And the last 2 are anarchy and single party state, which are kind of different. So anarchy is hard to explain because it's very chaotic, as you might imagine. Anarchy makes it so that everybody has exactly the same amount of political strength, and it also halves your authority. It also unlocks cooperative ownership in the economic system laws. And you also have to research anarchism before you do this, which is here in the tech tree. Next is single party state. So landed voting through universal suffrage will all cause political parties to appear. And what single party state does is it just merges all of them into one party. It does still technically have voting, but there's only one party to vote for, so it doesn't really matter. If you have single party state, you'll basically never run out of legitimacy. It does require political agitation, which is down here in the tech tree, but it takes a while to get there. Next is the citizenship laws. On the top is ethnostate, and then on the bottom is multiculturalism, and in between it kind of transitions from one to the other. If you have an ethnostate, only your primary cultures will not be discriminated against, and in the UK that would be the English and the Scottish. Multiculturalism will make it so that no one is discriminated against. You do have to research human rights before you get multiculturalism though, which is here on the tech tree. National supremacy makes it so that cultures with similar heritage and culture to your primary ones will not be discriminated against. In the case of the United Kingdom, it makes it so that the Welsh are not discriminated against, but the Irish are. So if we're playing as Great Britain and had a cultural exclusion enact, the Thai would likely be discriminated against because they have nothing in common with the British. And multiculturalism I already explained. Next is bureaucracy. We have 3 laws here: hereditary bureaucrats, appointed bureaucrats, and elected bureaucrats. Hereditary bureaucrats increases the political strength of the landowners, but decreases the bureaucracy cost for your population. Appointed bureaucrats increases the political power of the intelligentsia and increases your taxation capacity. And elected bureaucrats increases the power of the petite bourgeoisie and decreases the bureaucracy cost for your population again, but not as much as hereditary bureaucrats. Next is the army model. Peasant levies gives you a 25 barrack level cap, which means you can only have 25 level barracks in each state. It also gives you 2% conscription rate, which means 2% of your population can be conscripted. It gives you plus 10% morale loss, which is not great. It also increases the strength of the landowners. It also makes it so that you can only get a maximum of 25 battalions from each conscription center, so from each province. The professional army only has 1% conscription rate, so only 1% of your population can be conscripted, but it has a 100 max barrack level. It also gives you minus 10% morale loss and plus 25% political strength for the armed forces. Next we have national militia, which decreases the strength of the armed forces and only has a 5 barrack max level, but it has 5% conscription and minus 5% morale loss, but that's a very small amount, so I wouldn't pay much mind to it. It does 100 barrack max level, has 4% conscription, but it does give plus 5% morale loss, and plus 100% training time. Being able to switch out your specialist companies or your reconnaissance companies, you are stuck with cavalry, scouts, and standardized infantry. And I forgot to mention this before, but peasant levies disallows being able to have specialist companies, reconnaissance. You can only go up to mobile artillery, you can't have shrapnel or siege. And you also can't go further than trench warfare, which isn't too bad, but for the conscription centers, you can't go further than line infantry and you can't have any artillery. The last one for government principles is the internal security. Most countries start out with no home affairs, which has no effect, so I won't talk about it. Having any of these 3 will activate an institution, which are these things, by the way. They cost bureaucracy and you can upgrade them up to 5 levels depending on your research. National Guard increases your conscription rate by 0.5 every time you upgrade the institution, decreases your revolution progress speed, decreases your secession's progress speed, and reduces your political movement radicalism by a little bit. Like I said, it can be upgraded up to 5 times, and each time it adds minus 5%, so up to minus 25% political movement radicalism. Next is the secret police state. Secret police is similar to National Guard, but it decreases political movement radicalism even more and increases your suppression impact. So if I were to suppress the rural folk here, I would right click, click suppress, and if I had secret police, this would be 5% more effective, up to 25% more effective. Guaranteed liberties is the last one on this list. Reduces revolution and succession speed just like the rest of them, but it also gives minus 5% radicals from standard of living decreases and plus 5% loyalists from standard of living decreases. This can be increased by 5% up to 5 times, so up to minus 25% and up to plus 25%. We're done with the power structure laws, now let's go to the economy ones. First is the economic systems, and there's a lot to talk about here. Like I said, I'll try to be as brief as possible, but there's a lot to talk about. The main stats you want to keep in mind for the economic systems are your private construction allocation and subsidies. So a lot of countries start out with interventionism, such as Great Britain, France, the US, Spain, Prussia, Austria, Sweden, the Netherlands, and Denmark, and Belgium too. Interventionism is a good baseline to work with. I say that because I look at the tooltip and I can read it in under 3 minutes. It does 50% private construction allocation and you can subsidize all buildings. It also unlocks government run for railways. What private construction allocation is that allocates 50% of all of your construction points, so these here that come from your construction sectors, will be allocated to private construction. The other 50% will be added to government construction, but if you're not constructing anything, it'll all go to private construction. A lot of countries start out with traditionalism, such as Russia, China, and Japan. This has only 25% private construction allocation, minus 25% taxation capacity, minus 25% bureaucracy, population costs. You can subsidize just infrastructure and trade centers. Infrastructure really just consists of railways and ports, by the way. And also decreases the amount of investment pool you get from your aristocrats, shopkeepers, and capitalists. And your capitalists mainly are the main people you're going to be getting this from anyway. Basically, traditionalism is awful and try to switch out of it as soon as you can. Next is agrarianism. It's similar to interventionism, wherein it only has 50% private construction allocation. It allows you to subsidize agricultural things, as you might imagine, as well as infrastructure and trade centers. It increases the amount of investment you get from aristocrats and farmers, but decreases the amount you get from capitalists. Industry band is just a meme. You get 10% agricultural throughput can subsidize most agricultural things, get 25% investment from aristocrats, minus 10% minimum expected standard of living, which is an odd stat for this, but I guess it makes sense, 50% private construction allocation, and plus 50% political strength for the rural folk. Also does minus 25% production research speed. So you research stuff in the production tab 25% slower, and minus 25% technology spread for production. Doesn't sound too bad, right? Well, see at the bottom it says here that you are no longer allowed to build industry buildings, and all of your industry buildings will be destroyed. I see no reason on earth why you'd ever want to get this other than for a meme. I guess it's kind of neat that it exists, I guess. But that's enough about that. Next is my personal favorite, laissez-faire. It gives 75% private construction allocation, minus 25% loan interest rate. You can subsidize infrastructure and trade centers. You are not allowed to downsize any non-government buildings. And you get plus 25% investment from capitalists and shopkeepers. Capitalists are going to give you more investment than anyone else, so that's amazing. If you like deficit spending, minus 25% loan interest rate is going to be great for you. And more private construction allocation means that more private buildings are going to get constructed and you're not going to have to pay for them, so why not? The biggest problem here is that you cannot downsize buildings that aren't owned by the government. So if it's not a barrack, conscription center, naval base, construction sector, subsistence farm, university, or government administration, then you cannot get rid of it. Next is cooperative ownership, which is pretty different. You only get 35% private construction allocation, and you can subsidize all buildings. You get plus 25% investment from farmers and shopkeepers. You can only have it if you have a council republic and do not have serfdom, which I'll go over later. But the main thing it does is it sets everything to worker cooperative. Let's use this textile mill in the Midlands as an example. Right now, this is privately owned. This means that the profits are going to the people that own it, which are the capitalists. If I were to set it to worker cooperative, though, that would give +1 workforce owner shares. It would also get rid of all the capitalists and increase the employment of shopkeepers. So all the capitalists are gone, and that would make it so that since they all have a share in the company now, every single person that works for this would receive a portion of the profits. Sounds pretty neat. Doesn't really work too well in real life. This is a video game and I haven't played enough around with it too much, so I can't really tell you if it's effective or not. The last one is command economy, and you have to have central planning in order to unlock this. Central planning is here, by the way, and it's very far down the tree. The command economy is also very different. You have to have either an autocracy, oligarchy, single-party state, or a technocracy in order to have it. What this does is this just turns off the private construction mechanics. It also makes it so that you have to subsidize all of your buildings, and also all of its profits go to your treasury. Economic systems out of the way, let's go to trade policy. What these do is these affect tariffs, except for isolationism, which I'll start off with first because it's the easiest one to explain. Gives you 50% authority, some taxation capacity, minus 50% maximum declared interests, and minus 15% technology spread. Oh yeah, and it also makes it so that you can't trade at all. Mercantilism increases your tariffs on imports and decreases them on exports. Protectionism makes it equal for both for the most part, and free trade gets rid of all tariffs. It also makes it cost less to trade, it makes your trade routes more competitive, and it makes your trade routes larger. The volume in which the amount of stuff you're trading, you can trade more stuff. Anyways, taxation. I'm gonna put this all in monkey terms instead of talking in terms of statistics. This one makes it so that people only pay taxes on consumption taxes, which are these here. This one makes it so that the peasants pay taxes. This one makes it so that the factory workers pay taxes. This one makes it so that everyone pays taxes. This one makes it so that mostly the rich people pay taxes. Generally speaking, proportional taxes is the best one because it'll make the most money from it for the most part. Next is land reform, and this is new, at least with the latest update, which was a while ago. So it's really not new. Anyways, we have serfdom, tenant farmers, commercialized agriculture, homesteading, collective agriculture, and they're all kind of self-explanatory. What all these do is they disallow or allow certain production methods and increase the political strength of certain interest groups. Serfdom gives the landowners more political strength. Tenant farmers gives the landowners more political strength. Commercialized agriculture does nothing. Homesteading gives the rural folk political strength, and collectivized agriculture gives bureaucrats strength. You can only have this if you have a command economy or cooperative ownership. Serfdom, shockingly, unlocks serfdom for your subsistence farms. It increases your output by a little bit, and people don't like it. Tenant farmers and commercialized agriculture are basically the same. However, with commercialized agriculture, you can have them set to publicly traded, which just employs more capitalists. Homesteading, shockingly, unlocks homesteading, which decreases the amount of aristocrats employed and increases the amount of farmers employed. Collectivized agriculture makes it all government ran, which I already explained with the command economy. Next is colonization. There's no colonial affairs, which doesn't do anything. Colonial resettlement and colonial exploitation. Both of these unlock an institution and can be upgraded, which means that if I wanted to establish a colony, say here, right now it's taking about 600 days. If I were to increase the amount of my institution investment, it would take less time for it to expand. They both produce colonial growth. Colonial resettlement increases your migration attraction in unincorporated states, and exploitation does a bunch of exploitative things. Increases throughput in unincorporated states. It decreases the starting wages in unincorporated states, and decreases the subsistence output in unincorporated states. It also decreases your tension decay. Next is policing. We have no police, which does nothing. Local police force, which enables the law enforcement institution and gives political strength to the landowners. Dedicated police force, which instead of giving political strength, it decreases radicals from standard of living. Militarized police force, which increases mortality per turmoil. If you have more turmoil in a state, such as here, there's 25% turmoil here, it will increase the amount of people that die in that state. It also increases the political strength of the armed forces, decreases radicals from discrimination and radicals from standard of living, but only by 5%, but like I said, you can upgrade it. And all of these decrease the penalties from turmoil, and that is its main function. Next is the education system. There's no schools, which does nothing. All these increase education access by different amounts and also do something else along with it. Religious schools increase the political strength of the church and increase conversion. Private schools makes it so that you get more education the wealthier you are, and the intelligentsia get more political strength. And then public schools just gives flat out education access, and then assimilation. It does not strengthen any political parties. The last one in the economy one is the health system. There's no health system, which doesn't do any. All the other ones decrease mortality by different amounts, and then charity hospitals decrease mortality, also gives political strength to the devout. Private health insurance makes it so that it decreases the mortality depending on how wealthy you are, as you might imagine. And then public health insurance does minus 5% mortality every time you upgrade it. This is an institution, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that. So every time you upgrade it here, it'll decrease mortality by 5%, so up to 25%. Next is human rights, or just rights. We'll start with free speech. Outlaw dissent gives you 200 authority and does minus 50% suppression, also minus 15% technology spread. But suppression, that means that if I wanted to suppress the rural folk, that instead of doing minus 30% interest group attraction, it would do minus 50%. Censorship is mostly the same, but a little bit less. Right of assembly is 30% and 50 authority. Protected speech increases your technology spread, but makes it so you cannot bolster or suppress interest groups. You also have to have unlocked human rights in order to unlock it. Next is labor rights. No workers' rights doesn't do anything. Regulatory bodies is an institution, which every time you upgrade it does minus 20% dangerous working conditions up to 100%. Example of dangerous working conditions is construction sector. They start out with plus 10% mortality for laborers. If you were to max out that institution, this would go down to 0. At least I think that's how that works. Workers' protections does the same thing, but it also increases the minimum wage. The way to check what the minimum wage is to go to your government spending and hover over medium government wages, and it'll tell you what your average annual government wage is, which is the same as your minimum wage. or your average wage. If you have no workers' rights or regulatory bodies, there is no minimum wage. But if you have workers' protections, this establishes the minimum wage. So right now the average wage is 5.37. This, if we passed it right now, it would make it 15% of that, which is 0.8 pounds, which isn't a lot, but it's worth mentioning. Anyway, next one. Children's rights. Child labor allowed, restricted child labor, and compulsory school pretty much do all the same thing. You start with this, and the further you work southward, the more it disappears. Starts out with plus 30% dependents income. So dependents are basically the people in your country that are not a working adult male, that is. And dependents are often the majority of the population because half of them are women, which aren't supposed to work if you don't have the laws for it, and children and old people. Also increases your mortality rate for farmers, laborers, mechanists, and peasants. Restricted child labor does half of all that, increases your max education investment. Compulsory school gets rid of all of it and increases your max education investment to 2. So having this plus a bunch of other tech will allow you to max out your education investment. Next is the rights of women. We have legal guardianship, which increases your birth rate by 5%. We have propertied women, however that's pronounced. We have PW, which is plus 5% workforce ratio. So that increases the amount of dependents that are a part of the workforce. Women in the workforce gives plus 10% workforce ratio, but decreases your birth rate by 5%. To be able to get this and this, you have to have unlocked feminism and wait for the feminist movement to appear, because if not, then no parties or interest groups will support it until they appear. Feminism is here, by the way, right under human rights. Women's suffrage gives plus 15% workforce ratio, plus 33% dependents enfranchisement. So normally your dependents can't vote. This means that 33% of them can, and then minus 5% birth rate. This can only be unlocked if you also have some kind of voting in place. Next, we have welfare. We start out with no social security, which doesn't do anything. Poor laws, wage subsidies, and old age pension. Now, these all mostly do the same thing. So welfare payments, they all give welfare payments and activate the institution for that. What welfare payments do is they take people that are making below the minimum wage and they feed them money from your treasury until they are making the minimum wage. So if the minimum wage is 2 and I'm making 1, then 1 would come out of my treasury and go to me. You start out with just 20, you can get up to 100%, I believe, which means that 100% of people will be doing that too, but at 20%, only 20% of people that are making below minimum wage will actually have that happen. Poor laws also decreases the political strength of people who are receiving welfare. Wage subsidies doesn't really do anything but welfare payments. Old age pension decreases your workforce ratio, but also increases your dependents' income and dependents' enfranchisement. Next is migration. No migration controls makes it so that anyone can go anywhere. Migration controls makes it so that people that are discriminated against in your country cannot migrate. And closed borders makes it so that nobody can move anywhere, not even between the provinces in your own country. The last one on the list is slavery. We have slavery banned, which means you can't have slavery. Slave trade, which increases the landowner's political strength by 50% and unlocks slavery. This makes it so that people that are discriminated against in your country can end up on farms and whatnot, work there and not be paid. But I'm sure you're all familiar with how slavery works. That slavery is kind of self-explanatory, but it means that anyone can be enslaved as long as they're poor enough. Legacy slavery means that if slavery already exists in your country and then you get this, then any new places you take over won't have slavery. I do believe that is all the laws.